G'day, folks. You're on Fresh FM, the Deadline Report with Ben Vidgen. This is going to be part A, which we're going to simply call Authenticate, because today's show is all about making sure that you're getting information that's reliable and that's absolutely, you can't be accused of being buying into conspiracy theories or fake news. Um, this is very, very important, I think, especially if you're of the opinion, as such as I am, that your mainstream media is not a particularly good news diet either. So you probably, lean towards alternative news sources. That's would be me. But not all information is created equally. So, what I thought I'd do today is do a series today, which is based on a basic kind of rule I try to run through when I'm doing my own research, which I call my ABCs. A is for authenticate, B is for backed up, and C is for credible. I've got different other sort of rules and laws that I use because the thing is, what I get very frustrated with when I look at a lot of research, and I don't care about what people's dogma is or what their ideology is or whether the mainstream or the alternative, is that there seems to be a fall by the way of actually processing and delivering research for public consumption that actually step follows and through with a very set methodology which if followed through and adhered to, I believe ultimately almost delivers you a I wouldn't say truthful because truth. I hate the word the truth. Everyone's truth is altered by perception and where they're standing, but it provides you with an accurate account so that when you're delivering a perception or your interpretation of events, people know that you can be at least trusted to provide accurate information. So I always speak from my truth. I don't expect my truth to be the same as everyone else's, but I do expect people who get to know my information to know that. Excuse me for a second, that my information is generally based on pretty thorough research and I follow a set methodology. So I try and let that methodology come through, and that's what delivers me my final interpretation. It's a measure which if done properly, and you really got to be quite self-aware and train yourself. I think is pretty infallible. I've made a relatively good career out of my life of saying things which at the time people said, "Oh, that's all crap," and then 2 or 3 years later, hindsight catches up, and it turns out that I'm actually normally pretty much on the money, and that's normally because I try and approach things from an unpartisan viewpoint and just simply follow those methodologies. So enough. Let's get into and just make sure I mention my website, which is Postman Productions, or Ben Vidgen Investigates. Google it. My name. It shouldn't be that hard to track me down. But we're going to get into the issue of authentication today. Now, of course, A is for authenticate, which what that means is that when you read something on the internet, you're going, well, is this actually true, and the authentication process, to provide you an example of, where it goes badly is, recently I saw a piece online which said that Vladimir Putin's daughter had actually taken the new vaccine and she had died. Now, unsurprisingly, and in this case I'm quite correctly, that didn't last very long because the information that was provided on a website that had popped up only a week before it shared that wonderful bit of news, um, didn't really offer any information. It didn't come from experts within inside the Kremlin. It didn't provide with any documented evidence, and apparently one of its sources was actually a tarot reader. So that is, but I see this all the time. I see people jumping on information which has got absolutely not a single shred of evidence or any material to back it up. It's got, in other words, it's got no authentication, but because it fits their dogma and it's what they want to believe, then that's what that's what they end up believing. And in the world of authenticated news, where alternative news, we're really getting hammered. It's just not acceptable. It's not acceptable anymore to put stuff up on social media which you cannot back up with an actual source of information. And don't feel too bad for the average lay person if you do this, because it's actually very, very common in mainstream media as well. The best example of this perhaps is the story of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. For those who don't know the story, 1980s, Iraq bought lots and lots of chemical weapons, namely from Western countries in the United States. So there's a classic Garrick Tremaine cartoon with a truck saying, dragging along with a warhead saying weapons of mass destruction, and one of the soldiers is saying to the other one, well, how do we know that, whether they've got them? And the guy says, well, because we made them. That's pretty much what happened in Iraq. And in 1991, after the first Iraq War, which was again based on a large amounts of propaganda, if you read people like John Pilch goes into, Iraq had to destroy all these weapons, and the United Nations sent in experts like Charles Dufler from the CIA to see whether or not Iraq had actually done as it was meant to do. The short version of that is that yes, it did. There were materials left over. If you look at Appendix F of the United Nations official report, there were stockpiles, which again, post down the road, conservatives have tried to make that into a bigger mushroom than it actually is. But there was nothing that Iraq himself was actually aware of. And more importantly, when that pretext was actually presented by the Secretary of State, General Colin Powell, he not only presented information showing that, suggesting that Iraq, had weapons of mass destruction and they knew about it, but in actual fact, the proof of what's going on here was that it was later found out that those audio replays had actually been doctored so that they were designed to present a worse picture than it was the case. And of course, along came things like the yellow cake, and then you have in the United Kingdom the famous case where Blair turned around and provided information saying that as proof that they had weapons of mass destruction, that then turned around and launched a war in which, ensuing between the United States and the UK's involvement, over 50,000 people will be killed, and people still remain dying to this day, caused by substances such as depleted uranium, unexploded ordnance, and of course the huge and massive social and economic consequences of this war. A war which was largely drummed along by the mainstream media, who never challenged or checked that information, and went along with a pattern of hysteria and panic that came upon the back of a major panic event that occurred, which in this case was the 9/11 event, in which people were led to falsely believe that Iraq was tied up with the attack on the Twin Towers. Likewise, this was done so by things like the anthrax attack, which early on in the piece, the same media tried to make out was tied to the 9/11 terrorists, and again was supported by people like Colin Powell. But when the Federation of American Scientists came along and actually did gene sequencing on it, which is kind of like, what's not happening with the second outbreak, so we don't really know what the source of that material is in New Zealand, but in the United States case, they actually traced that anthrax back to Fort Detrick's, the United States Army's Chemical Weapons Research Center. Nevertheless, war went ahead, and afterwards they had to clean it up and downplay the fact that they'd used false information, largely again pushed along by the mainstream media. And this unfolded with things like the Chilcot inquiry, and this is where a number of experts and officials marched up to a very controlled environment, largely held behind closed doors, very much like the Royal Commission involving the attack in Christchurch, and they were able to present information again in a misrepresented material, so they were able, giving data out of context. And one of these people, these fixers as they're known, was Sir Ronnie Fagan. Now, Sir Ronnie Fagan has actually got a New Zealand tie, because during this guy was a former old boy, and they had in the United Kingdom they had an inquiry into police corruption, and this was largely spread because of the nepotism within the police metro, the police metro, by the old boys or Masonic organisation. In New Zealand, we tend to get it all like, Masons, tinfoil conspiracy theory. I don't particularly think the Masons are any bigger deal than any other power block, but they are a network of old white boys, it's part of the old boy network, and this is something that in the United Kingdom that they knew, they're very aware of. You see the Monty Python, it's lampooned, and things like Irving Welsh's Pig. You've got the Secret Ball, and of course in the United Kingdom, and this inquiry unfolded because of this widespread public knowledge of that this nepotism existed. It was too whitewashed ultimately in the end, but that inquiry was actually held in conjunction overseen by Sir Ronnie Fagan, who at that time was training up a communications graduate from New Zealand who would be known as Jacinda Ardern, our former Prime Minister. Jacinda also turned around and worked with the great PR guru Sir William Sargent, and she did that for the Bureau of Better Businesses, I think it's actually called, in the United Kingdom, before coming back to New Zealand after a short sojourn in the USA, where she was fast-tracked to become the Prime Minister of Prime Minister of New Zealand as the head of the Labour fraction. She was picked largely because of the fact that she is a very good communicator, or communications expert, because again that's what her training is in, and that she is able to present information in a way which, she makes a great fronts person. I have no problems with Jacinda as a person, but it's very interesting that the media never really kind of highlight actually what her background and training is. So, what is a communications expert? I mean, if you're my age and you've grown up watching things like Alan Bastard, Absolute Power, Yes Minister, you'll actually know this. You'll have a good understanding of the way that information can be twisted and material left out. So in other words, it's not authenticated. But I guess in a summary, what we say is a communications expert is someone that seems to tell you that a bombed out building in a war zone is actually a little building with a little fixer-upper in an interesting and fast-moving neighborhood. So they're able to make that glass seem always half full as opposed to half empty. In New Zealand, I picked on Jacinda today, but the reality is our government is absolutely full of this situation where our governments are controlled by people that spend millions in public relations, that are trained in the art of communications and spin doctrine. And more often than not, now when we look at our what comes out of government or out of our mainstream press, it's normally a replication of what the government has handed down in a press release, or you get to see the government deliver their version of the narrative in a very controlled environment where the public is given very little opportunity to ask or challenge the official narrative directly. And this, of course, is, you've got companies like out there like Cordy and so on that are actually meant to be New Zealand-owned companies, but again you find, and this is a company that handles media frequencies. You've got people like Tony O'Brien, who's one of the great inner old boys that are wandering around Parliament with swipe cards, that are great lobbyists, and they're telling both Labour and National how to deliver that little bombed out building as an interesting fixer-upper. I think that'll do for the moment. In the next two sections, which we'll have to rush through, we may even have to turn this into a part one and part two. But we will in the next section deal with the issues of B for backed up and C for credible. You're listening to Ben Vidgen on the Deadline Report, Fresh FM, or at least you will be if you're actually listening to this live. If not, tune in to me in fact, you can either tune in to me live on Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. or on Sunday mornings, every second afternoon on Fresh FM, or you can come to my website and listen to my podcast, where all of this will actually all be put together and we'll intercede it with some great music. On that note, let's get out of this section with Tell Me Lies, Sweet Little Lies by Pink Floyd. I think it's Pink Floyd. No, it's not. Fleetwood Mac. See, I nearly told you a lie. Catch you later.